I want to turn this 3D print into a Padme overhead bucket diorama. What do I mean like that? Well, Attack of the Clones, Padme's lost in the bottom of a bucket. Just like this. So this overhead bucket system is part of the scatter from my upcoming Chorix, the Lava Moon Kickstarter. If you're interested, it starts 26th of September. There'll be a link down below and in one of those cardy things, and it's going to be fun. It's everything lava. I've had so much fun designing it, and it's enabling me to do loads of quirky little dioramas like this. Now these are all printed in FDM, nice and robust for terrain, won't shatter or warp like resin might. They all clip together so you can take them apart, and in this instance, if you put some clips in the bucket, you can make sure they stay upright. If you leave the clips out, it will still hold in this hangy little hanger, and you'll be able to tip the bucket to get Padme in. Trouble is, if you leave it unclipped, sometimes it also flips upside down. So the first thing I did was take everything outside and prime it with a rattle can. Grey for most of it, but I used Ebano from Cobra, it's a dark brown, for the bucket because, well, I feel they need to be a dark brown. I also have a Padme model from Legion. This is from Star Wars Legion, it's the official model, and I've put it on a Darkfire Designs base. Now, the really observant of you may have noticed that one of my pieces has warped. It wasn't like this when I printed it, and all I can think is that when I painted them outside, I left them in the sun to dry. It was early morning, so it wasn't too hot. Maybe this one got more sun, or maybe it was a different colour. I don't know. Just why did this one warp? I have no idea, but it did. But now I've got all my pieces, it's time to paint them. Now I haven't mentioned prepping the prints, filling them, sorting them, and that's because I haven't. I've got huge amounts to paint ready for my Kickstarter, so instead I'm going to use these little weathering sponges to try and break up the layer lines that are visible. I don't have time to fill every single piece of terrain that I'm going to paint over the next 3 weeks. And because of that, I'm going to use some tricks, which I'm going to share with you now. The first trick, actually it doesn't apply here, and that's to just watch the direction you print your layer lines in. So if you're doing a wall and your layer lines go vertically up and down, it can go in the direction that you would be streaking weathering, and it can kind of mask it a little bit. But the second trick does apply, and that is to paint splodgily. There's a number of ways to do that. One easy way is to pre-shade. You go over with a black layer and an airbrush underneath, and you paint something really splodgy, and then you cover it with a thin coat of the final colour, and then it just isn't even, so it looks slightly worn and torn, and it helps mask the layer lines. The second way is to use something like the sponge I've got here. These are in a tube and they're a fine sponge, and you just dab on, you dry brush it almost. You don't want it too wet, you don't want it too dry, but you dab it on and it puts a pattern, a texture on that is nothing like the print. And so it distracts the eye from the print itself. Now I've done this in lava grey, which is the colour I've used for all my terrain. I've got a huge pot mixed up, and then I also have a brown that I mixed up for lava. I didn't use it that much, but it's just a handy warm brown, and I went over it again with that to give a bit of variety. So there's 2 textures on here. The trick is to be light-handed with it. If you go in too heavy, it just looks like splodgy paint. And whilst we're on a roll, tip number 3, dry brushing. Only put it on the edges. Do not dry brush any flat panels. Otherwise, you can actually bring out the layer lines. And even if you're just doing the edges, it's really hard. If you want to catch the edges, actually the sponge method is slightly better. One other thing about dry brushing, it's fine over pale colours. It's not fine using a pale colour over dark colour like this. All I did on this when I wanted to weather it was bring out the layer lines. It really sucked and I shouldn't have done it. But I did it, can't change it. And I may at some point go back and actually dry brush this with a darker colour to get rid of it. And tip number 4, I love washes. I really love washes. I use them on everything. I love oil washes the most, but they really bring out the layer lines if you're not careful. And that's especially a problem on light colours. If you put a dirt coloured wash over it, you need to wipe it off or you're just highlighting all those grooves. But my favourite oil washes take 2 or 3 days to dry, and I'm in a rush. So instead, I'm using this acrylic black wash that I made for my 5-minute video, Washes Magic in a Bottle. I'm not letting it pool or sit in the layer lines. I'm using the brush to wipe it off. And this works especially well because this is a very matte primer. The primer has quite a grainy surface to it almost, and it grabs the colour. So this wash does 2 amazing things. One, it sits in the grooves and brings out the details, puts some shadows in, but I don't let it sit too heavily. So that's almost a minor point compared to it actually makes a filter over the surface and it puts a dirty, grungy look. Now, if you're like me, you put quite a dark colour over quite a light colour, they can look a little bit disparate and disjointed. And I've got the brown in there as well. If you put a wash over everything, it ties it all together and tones it all down. It's lovely. Really like it. The only downside is I do find it actually dries glossy. It may be matte, it may have loads of matte medium in there, but the black ink is a very glossy ink and it just dries shiny. But we can fix that at the end by spraying on some matte varnish. I also need to paint the lava. So I put on some white ink to lighten up the brown. It's just too dark to put lava over. I don't think I waited long enough for it to dry before I put the orange on because it kind of mixed in. So I left it overnight. Now, wisdom says you should do contrast paints over white, but I did them over the grotty grey just to stain it a little. If I dry brushed a white on, I might have accented the layer lines. I guess I could have splodged a white on with a sponge, but I didn't. So I just painted these bits in yellow and orange. The next day I repainted the orange, and I'm keen to get an OSL, an object source lighting, as in a glow from the lava onto the inside of the barrel, so you can see it from outside. But it's not quite there yet. And I'm also thinking about texturing the lava, in which case all of this that I've just put on won't show. But anyway, I also dry brushed the darker colours so that it wasn't all just bright orange. I thought it'd be a little bit darker when it's in a barrel. Time for crud. It's a very simple recipe and it's going to go on the inside and outside of the barrels to represent the dried, hardened lava. It's paint, the lava grey, it's white glue, it's too much water so I had to add more of everything, don't do that, and it's sand. And sand adds the granularity that you need. You just mix it all together, make sure it's nice and paintable on, and you're good to go. However, I did think it was a little light, so I did add some black ink into this just to darken it a little. I could have added more paint. And for this, use one of your really old brushes, nothing precious, and you just paint it on. Now you can make this mixture thicker or thinner depending how much grit you want in it and how much you want it to shrink as it dries, because it will shrink down. I like it to be quite paintable so I can dab it on, which means sometimes I'll get more paint than sand, but I like the way that works for me. Then, because I'm impatient, when I built it all up, I hair dried it to just dry it so I could get on with the next step, which was dry brushing where I'd splodged it all grey inside, dry brushing the OSL back on, so putting on a bit more light, just with some very thin orange paint going over. I'd splodged grey here and it just looked really dark and miserable. Now it looks bright and lavary. I broke out the black acrylic wash again and went over it. It just looks very samey and that's not how I envisaged it. I also wanted it a little bit darker. So nice black wash over the top, again over the barrel. It's still looking really glossy and this was a gloss paint underneath, and also inside just to darken everything down. And finally, when that was dry, I took it outside and sprayed it with an acrylic matte varnish. And finally, we needed Padme. Now she's been primed white, the base has been primed in black and then painted tire black. Time to paint her. I'm using Army Painter Speed Paints for speed. This is pallid bone and I mixed it about half and half with the medium that just pads it out and dilutes it because it's a little strong. And I painted in all of those areas that are going to be slightly darker. If we look on the picture, it's the belt and boots mostly. I diluted it even further and then put it on her white areas. Now I'm going to dry brush these or paint them white in a minute, but I needed to put something in the shadows. I was torn between this colour or the grey. I'm not sure, I think the grey might actually have been better, but this worked in the long run. Crusader skin on the hands and face, dark wood for the hair, and Gravelord grey for her gun. And whilst I had some spare pallid bone, I used it to paint up Cal Kestis's poncho for the next diorama. When that was dry, I touched up the white so that it read as white rather than grungy beige. Her armband's got broadsword silver, which is another speed paint that's just come out. I also put a little bit on her gun. Let's not mention the eyes. They're white with a little bit of Gravelord around the outside. I never got the pupils to look good. I painted the base with some lava grey and then used Tamiya panel liner to bring out the cracks and deep crevices in it. And with a coat of matte varnish to come, I'm done. Brave Senator Amidala is on a desperate mission to secure the vital lava factory plans. With those plans in her possession, her path takes her over the perilous overhead bucket system rail. But wait, she's slipped. She's fallen in a thankfully empty bucket. But the next one is full of lava. Help! Help! I can't get out! I can't get out! Help! Help! But no one hears her desperate cries. Our plucky senator looks doomed to die as her bucket inches closer to the lava-filling machine. But wait, the barrel tips before it is filled with lava, spilling our plucky heroine to the ground. Now she must make her way on foot across the treacherous lava fields. Senator Amidala makes her daring escape, complete with the lava factory plans. I'm glad she made it home safely. And if you want your own overhead bucket system to put on a tabletop game mat or just in a diorama or something, then it will be available on my Kickstarter that starts 26th of September. It's Corrix the Lava Moon, all things lava. We've got everything from Vader's Castle, coming on a video soon, some Survivor-inspired wall runs and stuff, also coming on a video soon, plus lava terrain, a lava factory, loads of factory equipment. There's just so much on there and it'll fit with so many dioramas and games. I'm really excited to bring it to you. But enough of that. See you next time. Have a great week.